A young girl, no more than 10, stood on a corner in the industrial part of town with her small cardboard box of hand-drawn pictures. Her mother worked double shifts at a diner, barely scraping enough together for rent. The girl's art was raw, untrained, but honest. Sketches of flowers, houses, angels with broken wings. Passers-by ignored her most days, but one biker stopped. He looked at her drawings for a long moment, bought 3, and left. The next morning, something impossible happened. 70 motorcycles rolled into that neighborhood, and they weren't there by accident. What started as a child's desperate attempt to help her family would ignite a chain of loyalty and protection that would shake the entire community and reveal the depth of honor that still existed in the hearts of men who had nothing left to lose. The November wind carried the smell of rust and forgotten promises through the industrial district. Maya sat cross-legged on the concrete, her small cardboard box positioned between her thin legs, a hand-painted sign leaning against it. Drawings, $2 each. Her fingers were stained with marker ink, blues, greens, the yellow of a sun that rarely broke through the smog in this part of the city. The diner where her mother worked was 3 blocks north. Maya knew the schedule by heart, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then 4 p.m. to midnight on Thursdays and Fridays. That meant Maya spent her afternoons and early evenings here, on this corner of Ashton and Fifth, where the warehouses stood like giants with broken windows and the traffic was sparse enough that she could hear the wind whistle between the buildings. Her mother, Teresa, had made her promise not to come down here. "It's dangerous," she'd said. Kneeling beside Maya's bed, brushing her dark hair back, "People aren't kind in places like that." But Teresa didn't understand that the rent was late, and the eviction notice had been taped to their apartment door in red letters that looked like blood. The electric bill sat unpaid on the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed, but barely kept things cold anymore. So Maya drew. She'd always drawn. Since she was small, her hands moved across paper without thinking, creating worlds that made sense, ordered, clean, full of light. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, said she had a gift. "Real talent," Mrs. Chen had whispered during art class, looking over her shoulder at a landscape Maya had sketched. Mountains that seemed to breathe, a lake that looked like it held real water. But gifts didn't pay bills. The box held 43 drawings today. She'd spent the weekend making them, sitting at the small kitchen table while her mother slept between shifts, drawing by the light of a single lamp. She'd drawn flowers for her mother, the lilies she used to grow on their balcony before they'd moved to this apartment. She'd drawn houses with gardens and children playing in yards. She'd drawn an angel with one wing broken, weeping, but with a light coming from her chest. A man approached around 3 p.m. He was older, maybe 45, with weathered skin and a beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in weeks. He wore a leather cut over a faded black shirt, and the insignia on the back made Maya's heart skip. A roaring engine, wings, a name she couldn't quite read. The cut was worn, stained, covered in patches that told stories she didn't have words for. He stopped directly in front of her box. Maya's first instinct was to feel afraid. Her mother's voice echoed, "Dangerous people." But something in the man's eyes, a sadness so deep it seemed to have its own gravity, made her stay still. He crouched down, his leather jacket creaking. His hands were scarred, fingers thick and strong. He picked up one of her drawings, the angel with the broken wing, and stared at it for a long time. Long enough that Maya began to feel like the wind had stopped, like the whole city had paused to watch what he would do. "How much?" he asked. His voice was rough gravel and smoke. $2, Maya whispered. He pulled out a crumpled 20 from his wallet and handed it to her. Then he picked up 2 more drawings, a mountain landscape and a sketch of a motorcycle, crude but spirited, and added another 20. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. He tucked the drawings carefully under his arm, like they were made of glass. "You're good, kid. Don't stop drawing." Then he walked to a motorcycle parked at the curb, a Harley, big and black and scarred like its owner, and rode away. Maya sat in the wind, holding the $40 in her small fist, watching the place where he'd disappeared. She didn't know his name. She didn't know she'd just changed everything. The phone call came to the clubhouse at 6:47 a.m. Marcus Hawk Daniels was in the back room, nursing cold coffee and reviewing the books. The club's finances were tight, always tight. 43 members, expenses that never stopped climbing, and a community that needed them more than they needed the Serpent's Ride. He'd patched in 20 years ago, back when riding meant something different, when the road was still an escape instead of a responsibility. The call was from Diego, one of the younger prospects. His voice shook. "Boss, you need to come down to Ashton and Fifth, now." Hawk didn't ask questions. He grabbed his cut and was at the warehouse district in 12 minutes. What he found made his chest tighten. A young girl, couldn't have been more than 10, was surrounded by 3 men. Not bikers, dealers. The kind that moved through the industrial zone like wolves. One of them had her cardboard box overturned, her drawings scattered across the concrete like fallen leaves. She was crying, trying to gather them, her small hands shaking. "Please," she was saying, "please, those aren't yours." One of the men grabbed her arm. Hawk felt something old and primal ignite in his chest. The same thing that had made him patch in all those years ago. The same fury that had driven him to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Diego saw him first and stepped back. The dealers saw the leather cut, the insignia, the weight of brotherhood behind it. They dropped the girl's arm like it was fire. "Walk away," Hawk said quietly. "Now, don't come back to this corner." They walked. Hawk knelt beside the girl who was still trembling. Her drawings were everywhere, scattered, stepped on, but not ruined, not yet. He began collecting them carefully, smoothing them, treating each one like it mattered. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maya," she whispered. My mom doesn't know I come here." Hawk looked at her small hands, her stained fingers, her face streaked with tears and determination. He saw his own daughter in her, the daughter he'd lost custody of years ago, the one he barely got to see. He saw the desperation of a child trying to help her family, the courage it took to sit on a street corner and sell art to strangers. He saw a promise that needed to be kept. "Your mom's name?" "Teresa. She works at Diaz's diner." By 7:30 a.m., Hawk was in the clubhouse calling a meet. By 8:15 a.m., every member with a bike and a conscience was gathered in the chapel. He told them about the girl. He told them about her mother working herself to death. He told them about the drawings, art made with the kind of hope that could break your heart if you let it. "We ride today," he said simply. "We show this family what family means." 70 bikers stood as one. Teresa finished her shift at 2 p.m., her feet aching, her back screaming. She'd been on her feet for 8 hours, refilling coffee cups and carrying plates, smiling at people who barely looked at her. The tips had been decent, $32, but it never felt like enough. She was thinking about the eviction notice, about the phone call she'd have to make to her landlord, about whether she could pick up a third shift on weekends when she stepped out of the diner and heard it. The sound started low, a distant rumble like thunder, but it grew. The ground seemed to vibrate with it. People on the street stopped and looked. Car horns blared as vehicles pulled to the sides of the road. Motorcycles, dozens of them, more than dozens. They came down Ashton Avenue like a river of chrome and leather, 70 bikes moving in perfect formation. The sound was deafening, an orchestra of engines, a symphony of loyalty. They moved with precision, a family bound by something deeper than blood, and they were heading straight toward the diner. Teresa's first thought was fear. Her second thought was of Maya. The convoy slowed as it reached Diaz's diner. The lead rider pulled in front, and he killed his engine. Silence fell like a stone. He was a large man, older, with a face that had lived hard but kept its honor. His cut bore patches that spoke of decades of service, of roads travelled and promises kept. He removed his helmet slowly, and his eyes, grey and steady, found Teresa in the crowd. "Teresa," he called out. She nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Marcus Daniels. Everyone calls me Hawk." He gestured behind him, where the other bikes lined up in two perfect columns, 58 engines silent, 58 riders sitting motionless. "We're here because your daughter sold us some drawings yesterday. Beautiful work, honest work." Teresa's legs nearly gave out. Hawk continued. "We also know you're carrying more weight than anyone should. We know about the eviction notice and the electric bill and the way you work yourself to the bone so she can have a chance." He paused, and something in his expression softened. "My club doesn't forget the families that matter. We look after our own, and right now, you and Maya are family." And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The clubhouse was a converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, 3 blocks from where Maya had been sitting with her drawings. The brick was weathered, painted with murals that told stories of fallen brothers, of roads travelled, of loyalty that transcended death. Inside, it was warm, coffee brewing, music playing low, the smell of leather and devotion. Hawk had invited Teresa and Maya to meet with him and the club's council. They sat at a long table, and Maya kept staring at the men around her, their cuts, their scars, their faces that looked like they'd been carved from stone and regret, but their eyes were kind when they looked at her. "Your daughter has talent," Hawk said to Teresa. He'd printed some of Maya's drawings, had them laid out on the table. Real talent, the kind that could mean something if it's nurtured. One of the other bikers, a man called Stone, who worked as a mechanic during the day, spoke up. "My daughter's been talking about art school. I could get Maya connected with some instructors, people who could teach her proper technique. No charge." Another biker, Tommy, worked in construction. "I can help you fix up that apartment, make sure everything's up to code. The landlord won't have any legal ground to evict if the place is maintained properly." A third, who went by the name Prophet because he'd survived things no one should survive, leaned forward. "I work part-time at the community center. We could set up a small shop where Maya sells her work, real gallery space. Percentage of the sales goes to the center. Rest goes to you two." Teresa was crying now, silently, her hands covering her face. Hawk stood and walked to where she sat. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of absolute protection. "Here's what's going to happen," he said quietly. "You're going to keep your apartment. We're handling the landlord. You're going to cut back to 1 job, maybe 2 if you want to, but you're not working yourself to death anymore. Maya's going to get proper art training. And both of you are going to understand something fundamental. You're not alone anymore." He turned to look at Maya directly. "I had a daughter once," he said. "I wasn't there for her like I should have been. I can't change that. But I can be here for you. I can make sure you get everything you need to become the artist you're meant to be. That's a promise I'm making now. And I don't break promises." Maya stood up and walked to Hawk. She was small enough that when she hugged him, her arms barely reached around his middle. But she held on like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the water. The clubhouse fell silent. 70 bikers watched a 10-year-old girl hold on to a man who'd just promised to change her life. And they understood. This was what they rode for. This was why they existed. Not for the road, not for the rebellion, but for moments like this, for the chance to keep promises that mattered. By the following Monday, Teresa had given notice at the second diner. Hawk had paid her 2 weeks' severance from his own pocket, and the club had collectively covered her rent and utilities for the next 6 months. Stone had arranged for 2 art instructors, one a retired professor, one a working artist, to meet with Maya twice a week at the community center. The apartment had been inspected, repaired, and certified compliant with every housing code in the city. The landlord, when confronted with the sight of 20 bikers pulling into his parking lot, suddenly became very cooperative about extending the lease indefinitely. Prophet had set up a small gallery space in the community center's foyer. He'd created a modest but professional display for Maya's drawings with proper framing and lighting. Within 3 days, her work had sold for over $400. Local news had picked up the story. Young artist discovers her voice with help of local motorcycle club, and suddenly people were coming just to see the girl who'd been selling her art on street corners. But the most important change was quieter. It happened at night, when Teresa sat at the kitchen table, no longer panicking about bills, and watched her daughter draw. Maya drew differently now, with more confidence, more complexity. She'd started sketching the bikers, Hawk with his head bowed in thought, Stone with his hands deep in an engine, Prophet with his eyes looking at something no one else could see. She drew them with reverence, with gratitude, with the understanding that they'd saved her life. One Thursday evening, Hawk stopped by the apartment. He brought groceries, real ones, not the budget selections Teresa used to buy. He sat with Maya while she drew and asked her questions about what she was working on. "This one," Maya said, pointing to a sketch she'd just started, "is about a promise." "Tell me," Hawk said. "It's about a man who had lost something he could never get back," Maya explained, her voice serious for a child. "But then he got a chance to keep a promise to someone else, and that helped him remember that not all promises are broken." Hawk looked at the sketch for a long moment. Then he stood, bent down, and kissed the top of her head. "You're gonna do something important," he said. "I don't know what yet, but I know it. Keep drawing, Maya. Keep seeing what the rest of us are too blind to see." The club held a formal ceremony 6 weeks after that first meeting. It was a tradition among the Serpent's Ride to formally acknowledge people who'd entered their circle, not as members, but as protected family. It was rare. It meant something. The entire clubhouse was full, 70 bikers, their old ladies, their kids, people from the community. A stage had been set up, and the national colors hung from the rafters. Hawk stood at the center, and he called forward Teresa and Maya. "In this club," Hawk said, his voice carrying through the space, "we believe in loyalty, in keeping our word, and in protecting those who can't protect themselves. Teresa, you came to us as a mother trying to survive. You're leaving as a daughter of the Serpent's Ride. That comes with protection, with family, with everything we have to give." He placed a hand on Teresa's shoulder, and the entire club roared, not in violence, but in affirmation. It was the sound of brotherhood recognizing a new member of its extended family. Then Hawk turned to Maya. "And you," he said, kneeling to eye level with her, "came to us selling drawings on a street corner. You're leaving as an artist, one of us, one of the family, protected and honored for as long as you draw breath." He presented Maya with a small leather vest, a junior cut, custom-made with the Serpent's Ride colors, and her name embroidered across the back. Maya, artist of the ride. The roar that went up was louder, fiercer, more passionate. These bikers weren't just acknowledging a child. They were acknowledging the future she represented, the hope that she carried. If this story about family and protection moved you, please hit that like button. Let's show the algorithm that this kind of brotherhood matters. 3 months into her training, Maya's work had evolved in ways that surprised everyone. Her drawings had started taking on a new dimension. They weren't just representations of what she saw, but interpretations of what she understood. She drew the pain in Hawk's eyes and called it redemption waiting. She drew the scars on the biker's hands and titled them Stories Worth Telling. She drew her mother's face the day they'd learned the eviction would never come, and she called that one Safety, Local galleries began calling. One offered to do a small exhibition of her work, 20 pieces professionally displayed with an opening reception. Hawke helped her select the pieces. Profit handled the logistics. Stone drove them to the gallery 3 blocks north of downtown, where Maya's art would be shown alongside professional artists. The opening night came on a Saturday. The gallery was packed. Art collectors, journalists, community leaders, and, in the back, leaning against the walls like gargoyles guarding a saint, the 70 bikers of the Serpent's Ride. A woman approached Maya, well-dressed with kind eyes and a portfolio under her arm. "I'm Dr. Michelle Chen," she said. "I run a scholarship program for underprivileged artists. I've been following your work since the community center. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to study art at Lincoln Academy, best school in the state." Maya looked at Hawke. He nodded. "I'd like that," Maya said, her voice steady. The woman smiled. "You're going to do something extraordinary," she said. "I can feel it." Later that night, back at the clubhouse, Hawke pulled Maya aside into his office. On the wall, he'd hung 3 of her drawings, framed professionally. The angel with the broken wing, the sketch of him with his head bowed, and the one she'd called Promise Keeper. "I want you to know something," he said. "When you walked into our lives, you were already an artist. But I think you're going to become something more. You're going to tell stories that matter, stories about what it means to survive, to hope, to be seen when the world wants you to be invisible." He paused, and she could see the weight of his own past in his eyes. "I couldn't save my daughter the way I wanted to," he continued, "but getting to be part of your story, getting to watch you grow. That's redemption, Maya. That's what honor looks like in the real world." Summer came with a weight all its own. The Lincoln Academy acceptance letter sat on their kitchen table like a golden promise, but it also represented a threshold. The moment when Maya would step fully into a world beyond the street corner, beyond the community center, into something larger and more uncertain. The application process had been intense. Multiple submissions of her best work, an interview with the director of admissions, a portfolio review by 3 master artists. Each step had felt monumental to a girl who, 6 months earlier, had been selling drawings for $2 on a concrete corner. But the instructors had pushed her, believed in her, and Hawke had driven her to every appointment, waiting in reception areas, with his leather-cut drawing stares, from people who didn't understand that a man like him could love a child like her with absolute, unconditional ferocity. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Teresa had been at work, and Maya had found it in the mailbox with hands that shook so badly she could barely open the envelope. When she read the words, "We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship," she'd sat down on the apartment steps and cried. That evening at the clubhouse, she'd shown it to Hawke. He'd read it 3 times, his face unreadable, before pulling her into an embrace so tight it felt like he was holding her together. "You did this," he'd said, "not us. You." But now, as the day approached for her to leave for the 4-week intensive program, Hawke was planning something. He'd called a meeting of the club's leadership, the road captain, the sergeant-at-arms, the treasurer, the 3 men who helped him steer the Serpent's Ride. They discussed it quietly, and then Hawke had made an announcement at the next full church meeting. "We're doing a convoy," he'd said simply. "All 70 bikes. We're taking Maya to Lincoln Academy, and we're showing that school and everyone in that city that she belongs there." The morning of departure arrived hot and bright. Maya wore new clothes, nothing fancy, just things that fit properly, that Teresa had carefully selected. She carried a single bag with her essentials. Everything else she would need, the academy had supplied or would provide. Hawke had arranged for the convoy to assemble at the clubhouse at 8 a.m. By 7:45, they were already arriving. Bikes pulling in one by one, riders in full colors. the rumble of engines creating a sound like distant thunder rolling across the industrial district. Teresa stood in the clubhouse, watching. She wore a simple dress, and her hair was down, no longer pulled back in the tight bun she used to wear at the diners. She looked lighter somehow, like she'd finally set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. "Your daughter's going to change the world," one of the old ladies said to her. Her name was Ruth, and her husband had been riding with Hawk for nearly 30 years. "I know," Teresa said quietly, "but I still can't believe it's real." At precisely 8:15 a.m., Hawk emerged from his office with Maya. She looked small in the sea of leather and chrome, but her head was high, her chin firm. He'd given her a junior cut, the one she'd received at the ceremony, and she wore it like armor. "Ready?" he asked her. She nodded. The convoy organized itself with military precision. 2 scouts on the lead bikes, then Hawk with Maya behind him, then 40 bikers in 2 columns of 20, then another 20 bringing up the rear. The city would see them coming from blocks away. As they pulled out of the clubhouse and onto the main streets, the sound was apocalyptic in its beauty. 70 engines creating a symphony of power and purpose. Traffic stopped. People came out of buildings. A police officer who might have ordinarily pulled them over simply stood at the intersection and saluted. They rode through neighborhoods Maya had known her whole life. The industrial zone where she'd sold her first drawings, the diner where her mother had worked herself to exhaustion, the community center where her talent had been recognized. In each place, people came out to watch. Children pointed. Elderly residents stepped onto their porches. It was a coronation disguised as a motorcycle ride. The highway stretched out before them, 70 bikes moving like a single organism, unified in purpose. Hawk kept the speed steady, not too fast, making sure the entire city could appreciate the moment. This wasn't just transportation, it was a statement. It was the serpent's ride saying, "This child matters, this girl's future matters. We will move heaven and earth to ensure she knows her own worth." 4 hours later, they approached Lincoln Academy. It sat on a sprawling campus, surrounded by manicured lawns and brick buildings that spoke of centuries of tradition and excellence. The gates were impressive, and the security guard at the entrance got on his radio as soon as he saw the convoy approaching. By the time they arrived at the main entrance, the director was already standing on the steps. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world to understand that sometimes extraordinary things arrived in the most unexpected forms. 70 motorcycles pulled into the circular drive and formed 2 perfect lines, creating a pathway like an honor guard. Engines killed simultaneously. Silence descended. Hawk helped Maya off his bike. She stood there, small but composed, wearing her junior cut and carrying the weight of 70 bikers' belief in her. The director descended the steps slowly, deliberately, taking in the scene. She understood immediately what this meant, that this child had already been recognized as worthy, that she had been blessed with protection and belief from a community that didn't give such things lightly. "Welcome to Lincoln Academy, Maya," the director said, extending her hand. Maya shook it firmly. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who had already learned to speak her truth. The director turned to Hawk. "We will take good care of her," she said. "I know you will," Hawk replied, "because if you don't, all 70 of us will know about it. Not as a threat," he added, and his voice was gentle but absolute. "But as a fact, she's family." The director nodded, understanding perfectly. For the next hour, the bikers helped Maya move into her dorm room, carrying boxes, setting up her bed, arranging her space. They left her with supplies, with gift cards, with phone numbers for emergencies. They left her with photographs of themselves and the clubhouse so she'd remember where her protection came from. They left her with love, the kind that doesn't demand anything in return except that she become everything she was meant to be. At sunset, they gathered in the courtyard for the ride back. Maya stood among them, and Hawk pulled her close one final time. 4 weeks, he said. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to think about that corner where you used to sit and wonder if any of this is real. He paused, making sure she was looking at him. But it's real, Maya. You're real. Your talent is real. And when you get back, we'll be there. Every single one of us. She hugged him, and then she hugged Prophet, Stone, Diego, Tommy, and a dozen others whose names she'd learned, whose stories she carried. As the convoy pulled away, 70 bikes rumbling back toward the highway, Maya stood in the courtyard and watched them go. Other students gathered around her, asking who they were, why so many bikes had come for her. She smiled and told them the truth. "They're my family," she said simply. "They're my promise." The 4 weeks at Lincoln Academy transformed Maya in ways that even Hawk hadn't fully anticipated. She'd arrived as a talented girl with raw potential and fierce determination. She left as a young artist with technical mastery, conceptual depth, and a vision that extended far beyond what she could have imagined. Her instructors were masters in their fields. One, a sculptor who'd shown work in museums across the country. One, a painter who'd been featured in major publications. One, a mixed media artist whose installations had changed how people understood the relationship between art and community. They'd each recognized something in Maya that went beyond technical skill. They saw a girl who used art not just to express herself, but to heal, to honor, to bear witness to the stories of others. The intensive had required her to create a final portfolio, 20 pieces that would represent her voice as an emerging artist. Maya had taken risks. She'd abandoned some of the safer themes and dove into darker, more complex territory. She'd created a series called Invisible Architecture, drawings and paintings that depicted the hidden structures that hold communities together. The bus driver who remembers every passenger's story, the librarian who quietly changes lives through books, the motorcycle club that shows up when the world has forgotten you. One piece in particular had stopped everyone cold. It was a large mixed media work, charcoal drawing, acrylic paint, and actual thread stitched into the canvas. It showed the street corner where she'd sold her drawings, rendered in intricate detail, every crack in the concrete, every shadow, the exact angle of the light at 3 p.m. On an autumn day, and standing in that corner, rendered with photographic realism, was a small girl with her cardboard box and her drawings. But around her, almost invisible unless you looked closely, were silhouettes, dozens of them, representing all the bikers who would come to change her life. They weren't there yet in the image, but their presence was felt, anticipated, promised. She titled it Before the Convoy. The director of admissions, reviewing the final portfolios, had stopped at Maya's work and simply sat with it for 30 minutes. When she finally called Maya into her office, tears were streaming down her face. "This," she'd said, gesturing to the mixed media piece, "this is what art is supposed to do. It's supposed to tell us something true about being human, about how we save each other." The scholarship was formalized, not just for high school but for college as well, full ride with provisions for living expenses and materials. But more than that, the Academy was offering something unusual, a mentorship program where 3 of the master artists would continue working with Maya even after the intensive ended, guiding her development through video calls and written feedback. When Maya returned to the community, the Serpent's Ride was waiting. Not just waiting, they'd organized a welcome home gathering. The clubhouse was decorated with her artwork. A local news crew was there to cover the story. The community center director was there, and so was Dr. Chen, who'd helped launch Maya's career in the first place. Hawk stood at the center of it all, looking older than he had 6 weeks before. His hair seemed whiter, his movements a bit slower, but his eyes were brilliant with pride. "Welcome home, artist," he said to Maya. She ran to him and held him, and for a moment the entire clubhouse fell silent, not out of disruption, but out of reverence for the depth of what existed between them. That night, after the celebration had wound down and most of the bikers had headed home, Hawk took Maya to his office. On the wall beside her previous drawings, he'd hung the photograph of before the convoy, or rather, a professional print that the Academy had made. "I want to tell you something," Hawk said, settling into his chair. He looked tired, and Maya felt a small flutter of concern. "I want to tell you about the day I met you." He told her about finding her on that corner, about buying her drawings, about the way she'd looked up at him with hope and fear in equal measure. He told her about the moment he'd decided that his redemption would come through her, through being the man for her that he hadn't been able to be for his own daughter. "I was drowning," he said quietly. "For 20 years I was drowning in guilt and regret and the knowledge that I'd failed the people who mattered most. And then you showed up on a street corner, selling drawings for $2, and I realized something. I could still choose to be the man I should have been all along. I could still keep promises. I could still matter." He paused, and Maya saw tears on his weathered face. "You saved me," he said. "Just like I saved you. That's what family does." 2 years passed. Maya moved through high school with a focus and intensity that impressed her teachers. She continued teaching art at the community center, working with kids who came from the same background she did, showing them that talent wasn't enough, but talent plus determination plus people who believed in you could create miracles. The Serpent's Ride scholarship program she'd inspired now supported 12 young artists. Hawk had hired a full-time administrator to manage applications and oversee the program. Every year, 12 kids who might otherwise have had their talents buried under poverty and circumstance were given a chance. Her work continued to gain recognition. By the time she was 17, her pieces had been shown in galleries in 5 different states. Art magazines ran features. Universities began reaching out about early admission programs. But the real measure of her success, Maya understood, wasn't in gallery openings or magazine spreads. It was in the letters she received from kids in the community center, kids she'd taught, kids who'd seen her story and thought maybe, just maybe, they could create something beautiful too. One afternoon, 3 years after that first day on the street corner, Hawk called her to the clubhouse. She found him in his office, but he wasn't alone. The entire club was gathered in the chapel, all 70 of them, plus their families, plus people from the community. "We have something to show you," Hawk said. They walked her to the wall of the chapel. There, in a place of honor, hung a massive piece, an oil painting, professionally executed, showing the moment when the convoy had pulled up to the street corner, but the artist had captured something transcendent, the way the light fell, the way the bikers' faces looked, a mixture of power and tenderness that was almost impossible to reconcile. It was beautiful and fierce and profound. At the bottom, it was signed, Marcus Hawk Daniels, in honor of the girl who taught us that promises matter. "You painted this?" Maya asked, her voice small. "Been taking lessons," Hawk said, and there was humor in his voice. "Stone's daughter is an instructor. Turns out I've got a little bit of artist in me too." He pulled Maya close, and everyone in the chapel understood what they were witnessing, the full circle of a promise, the completion of a journey that had begun on a street corner and extended into infinity. "Your work goes into the world," Hawk said to her privately, so only she could hear. "But this is where it comes from. This is your foundation. This is your family. Never forget that." Years later, when Maya was showing her work in major galleries and teaching art at universities, she would still return to that painting. She would stand in front of it and remember the girl with the cardboard box, the man on the motorcycle, the 70 bikes that rumbled into her life and changed everything. She would remember that the most important art wasn't the kind that hung on gallery walls. It was the kind created in the space between people who loved each other, who kept their promises, who refused to let each other disappear into the darkness. She would remember Hawk, now retired, now older, but still riding, still protecting, still keeping his word. And she would understand that his real masterpiece wasn't any single painting or act of kindness. It was the life he'd helped her become. Every time she picked up a pencil, every time she created something from nothing, every time she reached out to a struggling artist and said, "You matter. Your voice deserves to be heard," she was honoring that promise. She was continuing the legacy of a man who'd believed in her when no one else was looking. The street corner where it had all begun was now marked with a small bronze plaque, paid for by the Serpent's Ride. Here, a girl sold her dreams. Here, a community learned to believe. And on quiet evenings, when the city hummed with its endless activity, you could still hear it sometimes, the distant rumble of motorcycles, the sound of a promise being kept, the echo of 70 bikers riding toward hope. Thank you for riding with us through Maya's journey, from a girl selling drawings on a street corner to an artist changing the world. This is what family looks like when blood doesn't matter and promises are sacred. If this story reminded you that we all have the power to change someone's life, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with someone who needs to know that redemption is real. We'll see you on the next ride, warriors. Stay true.